leadership development types of programs. And each one of these focuses on women at different levels in the organization as well. Emerging leaders, informal leaders, and strategic leaders. And approximately 50% of all the participants in those programs are women. So what we do is we make sure that when we're selecting individuals for those programs, we're ensuring that we're selecting them. Women are also very involved with our succession planning. As many companies, we have the challenges around not at the CEO level or the management committee level. We do have one woman who's part of our management committee, and that next level down. Really that third level down, we really are building that pipeline so that in the coming years we'll definitely be able to see women in the most senior levels of the organization. We also invest in externally. We invest in organizations like the Women's Food Service Forum and the Network of Executive Women, WFF and NEW, that might be the acronyms that people would recognize. We invest in those and we co-sponsor some of their events and make sure that women are a part of that and they attend those events and get additional development outside. We also provide opportunities for creating visibility for women in the organization. And one of those ways is actually through the multiple management boards. So through those boards, the women have the opportunity to serve or work with, if you will, a senior level executive for their primary client for each of the major projects that they work on. And so that they're working with that client, if you will, from beginning to end. And then when they report out on their projects at each of the 6-month terms, they report out to senior leadership about those particular projects. And to go on, and I think I'll kind of stop there.
Okay, all right, I'm sure we're going to have questions, so you'll probably have a great opportunity to say your word. Thank you so much. It's nice to hear McCormick is doing so much, and I think we all know the importance of the pipeline and looking at how we develop. I think that was also part of the dialogue we had when we were first starting this, is we were hearing from other companies that were saying, you know, we have women that are moving up, but they have nowhere to be able to access information about executive leadership and international. And I think, you know, that's our responsibility, all of us, to be able to do this and get this out. So thank you. Ms. Paci, how are your shoes? Okay. Last year, WorldBank released the latest report on gender equality and development, which argues that gender equality is not only a human right, but is smart economics. So if there's anything you take away today, it is not just about being a human right. It is about smart economics, having women in places of leadership. Greater gender equality can enhance productivity, improve development outcomes for the next generation, and make institutions more representative. I wanted you to talk a little bit more, and you alluded that you wanted to do that, about the report and how gender equality benefits economies and makes our world stronger.
Thanks very much. It's very okay. But I think there are a number of things about this report that the WorldBank did last year that are unique. So let me start by telling you a little bit about the report generally and then the finding. Every year, some of you may know this already, but every year the World Bank produces a flagship report, which is called the Human Development Report. They've done, as far as I know, I think 37 of them so far. This last year's one was the first one that was actually to do specifically with gender. It was actually on gender and development. So it was a great achievement for us to be able to do that, because I think even just the fact that the report was focusing on it was really showing very clearly to the whole development community how important gender was for development generally. So that's, for us, was a milestone. It's been it was launched last September at the annual meeting, in a very big meeting where all the Minister of Finance of all the countries in which the World Bank works, developed and developing countries were actually all there. And so it was presented to the Minister of Finance, and the argument was exactly that. It was presented to the Minister of Finance because generally, gender equality, women's rights are not just a question of rights, but a question about smart economics. So what are the main, first of all, what are the main findings, and then why is it gender equality, smart economics? The main findings are that over the last 25 years, for a quarter of a century pretty much, there's really been a lot of progress in gender equality all over the world. And the progress has been considerable and has been very, very accelerated, especially in developing countries that start off much worse, but then they caught up quite quickly, especially in some areas. And the areas where there's been real improvement are predominantly, as opposed to the more traditional ones. They things like education and health to some extent, some forms of labor market, and other areas really we're still behind in many ways, and not only in the developing world, also in the developed world. So amongst the progress, I said education. It's really interesting to see that if you look at primary education, girls are caught up compared to boys pretty much everywhere. And in fact, the totalist progress has been very, very fast. There are countries, for example, where girls, over the last couple of years, I think Ethiopia was a good example, where in 2007, there were 75 girls for every 100 boys in primary education. So there was 25 girls gap. In 2010, the number of girls had gone up to 91. So the progress was really substantial. Similar results are also true in Bangladesh and so on. In secondary and tertiary education, the results have been even higher. There are now about 90 countries in the world where there's more girls in secondary education than boys. There is about 50 where there is more girls in tertiary education than boys. So education is really good success story, at least in terms of sort of getting the degrees as such, or getting the qualification. Big issue remain with the subject matters, for example. A lot of girls still don't go in sciences, as we said before. And some issues still prevail amongst the very poor, the ethnic minorities, and so on. But that's a different story. In terms of health, also, the health prospects for a woman born now are clearly much better than they were even 20 years ago. Now, over the last 30 years, about 500 million women actually joined the labor force globally. So there's a huge increase in female participation in the labor market. But there is another side of the story. And starting with the last one, there are countries in the world, and North African countries are a good example, Tunisia and Morocco in fact, where there's still only about 25% of women that work, not more than that. But what is even more surprising, and there is a result of the work that our report, is that even in countries where female participation is very high, women still get paid a lot less than men. And I find absolutely fascinating this. Stuart Mill was one of the very first economists in 1760-something, said that the value of women's work should be considered like 3/4 of a man's daily work. Now, the average across the board is 80%. So we moved to 75% 3 years ago to 80% now. And with a crucial difference that when he was writing, the wage was very much related to physical strength, because it was very much to do with the type of work you were doing in the field, and now clearly we are not longer in that situation. So, and this variety, there is a lot of variety across different countries, but also in developed countries, the situation doesn't seem to be much better. In Germany, actually, the average female wage is 60% than one of a man. So there's huge differences. At the same time, there's a lot of evidence that if women were paid as much as men, or if women were as productive as men and had the same education, the global economy will look so much better. Not just now, but especially in the future. There's huge amount of evidence which is brought in the report that, for example, just to give you an example, in Cote d'Ivoire, they've actually done a really rigorous study that shows that giving $10 more per woman per month will increase children's outcomes in terms of survival of children, education of children, nutrition of children, so much that in order to make the same difference by giving the amount to the man, you like to give him $110. Basically because of the way money gets spent. There are studies in Kenya that show that if women had equal access to land and fertilizers, the growth rate for the country would be twice as high. And I can go on with lots of more examples, but I think I probably better stop here.
Ms. Paci, that was all outstanding. I think you can now see the relationship between education and health. One of the statistics I found that in the world, throughout the world, women do 2/3 of the work, but earn 1/3 of the income and own less than 2% of the land. And if you think about it again, we've got to be speaking more as women business leaders and as women leaders around the relationship of women as economic drivers for the world. That has to be more of our statements because we know it affects. We know that education of a woman affects their health. We know that it affects the health of their children. We're still not, it may be improving in women, but women are still dying in childbirth. Every 90 seconds, one woman in the world dies in childbirth. Every 2 minutes, one woman dies of cervical cancer. So to me, we've made progress, but we're in no way am I willing to settle for the circumstances of women around the world as we are. Where am I? I have one more question. I have one more question for both of you. As women in business, what are you finding to be the key benefits of having women on various teams? What strengths do they bring to your teams? I'll start with Kim.
I think there are a number of strengths that women bring to our teams. One is, first of all, their perspective. Having that perspective at the table and looking at and thinking differently is a major asset to have at the table. One of the things that we're finding with women is they tend to think inclusion a lot more. So when I say that, what I mean is when they're putting project teams together, when they're starting an association with women, which is one of the things we're doing at McCormick, one of the first things they're doing is saying who's at the table, who's not at the table. So they try to be much more inclusive around who's not at the table, and let's figure out how do we get those individuals at the table. They also tend to be very collaborative. They tend to work very well across differences, and sometimes that means across cultural differences. We have a lot of global teams, and we do a lot of work virtually, and so we find women oftentimes leading those particular teams and working effectively across those differences and those cultural differences. And trying to find that common ground in order to bring people together, in order to get to those project outcomes.
Ms. Paci, any comments about that?
I totally agree with what Kim said, actually. So the only thing I would like, I suppose, to add, in my experience, is really the multitasking is really important. I really think men are genetically incapable. and I think
it is in the WorldBank report, in case you're wondering.
And I think generally imagination or the vision that brings to it, and I think that was discussed before, for me is really important.
I love that. Visioning, inclusion, collaboration, and we're better at it. We're going to open up for questions now. We got 10 minutes to be able to have people ask questions. I have a question right here. If I don't see you, it's the way the lighting is, just stand up and wave. We want to get your questions in, please. Just introduce yourself and where you work.
I'm Nancy Novak. I'm an executive with Hensel Phelps Construction Company, a large national firm. I would like to know how to get my hands on that report that you talked about. I was just at the Women in the Economy Conference in Palm Beach that was sponsored by Wall Street Journal. And we talked about STEM, and trust me, I know a lot about that. And we talked about how the media affects women in leadership. But what we kept coming back to, and you'll see it in the report the Wall Street Journal put out, is making the business case for women to be in these executive positions. Because that's important for the people who advocate and sponsor for those positions, and it flows down from there. So that report, to me, says that there's more study on the business case, especially if it was the first time you addressed gender from the World Bank's perspective. So I'd like to know how to get a copy of that. Yes, Paci.
Actually, I'm really sorry. I planned to bring little sort of dissemination material, and I didn't do it. I left it in the office yesterday. It's actually completely downloadable from our website. There is even an app that you can put on your mobile device. So you can just go on your WorldBank external website and just type in World Development Report. It's called Gender and Development. It's World Development Report 2012. And you can just download it in every possible format you like.
And if any of you have not used the World Bank as a resource, you should. I go into that quite often. It really is a resource for those of you working in the international arena.
Can I just add one quick thing to this? There is an additional report which I think a lot of you will find really interesting, which fed into that, but it's done every year, which is actually called Law, Business and the Law. Women, Business and the Law, which actually does an analysis of the business regulations and more generally the labor market legislation and so on, and how that affects women in business for 147 countries, and it's absolutely fascinating. That's also downloadable, and actually the background information, all the data is also downloadable from our website. And it's absolutely fascinating the way there are sort of examples of discrimination that are hidden behind basically even the legislations in countries that are meant to be totally equal.
Exactly. Thank you. I saw a question here. Yes.
Hi, good morning. My name is Starla Hilton. I work for UPS.
Great.
And recently we've developed a program. It's been in place for about 3 years now called the Women's Leadership Development Committee. And it was something that we found that needed to be developed because UPS had issues retaining some of their top women employees. And I guess one of the questions I wanted to have is, what has, McCormick and some of your organizations done in order to retain some of the top women employees within your organization?
Great question. Kim.
It goes back to, I think, a couple of things from McCormick. One is the culture in and of itself. McCormick has a very, very strong and traditional culture, and there's a lot of things that we do still today, even though we're a global company. In some ways, I think we perform in some ways like we're still a very, very small company. In terms of the intimacy that we create with the town hall meetings with the CEO and the individuals who take personal interest in developing the women, all the many different leadership development types of programs, a lot of work-life balance initiatives, excellent work-life balance initiatives, including things like an on-site medical clinic for us, a lot of flexibility in the work hours, those types of things. So I think having the right type of culture really helps. And traditionally, we have low turnover, even on our hourly ranks. We have very, very low turnover, and that's been something that the company has had for years. So we've been really fortunate around that. The flexibility, I think, for women, even when I talk about the multiple management board and that being 4 to 5 year commitment, people can step away from the board, take time to do other things that they wish to do, have kids, whatever, they can come back and be participating on the board. And we just continue to try to develop and focus on the development of women and have these work-life balance types of initiatives in place. Those things I think are probably most helpful.
Ms. Paci, do you have anything to add to that?
I suppose the World Bank actually deliberately in 2007 started a 5-year strategy to actually increase the number of women and the diversity generally within the organization. And work-life balance is really important. I think the other one was just mentoring. And I think to some extent, even though officially they may not say that, some form of positive affirmative action, actually. So there was a real attempt to actually increase the number of women at the top jobs, at the sort of top management jobs, especially for the mentoring part, because it's so that younger women can have something to look at. And now we're really proud. 35% of all senior managers are actually women, and 2 out of 3 managing directors are women. And then we also recently had a female candidate, which was the first time ever. Wow.
It's time, not to be the first time anymore. Thank you, that's great. I have a question way over here. Can you see? Wave your hand. There she goes.
My name is Erin. I work at Erin Jones. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more. We've kind of touched on, moms, I'm a mom, but talking about women and, we have to multitask and, traditionally, if you're talking about taking on a career and building your career, and if you have a family, somebody has to be the primary caregiver. So, we want to do everything, and yet then we find that things suffer. question. So maybe kind of personally, if you have your own family, or if you don't, then working with other women, do you have any kind of words of advice as far as balancing those two things? But also, do you have any data behind allowing women more flexibility? Because again, traditionally we are the primary caregivers, which takes time. You have to take kids to appointments, or games, or all these things that require time and resources. And when you're trying to balance that with career, it's great to say yes, we want to have affirmative action, or we want to have these things in place. But sometimes to prove it to your employer that it really will benefit them in the end, are there any studies that you know of that kind of support that?
Thank you. So the first question is, and maybe Kim, you can take the first question. Personally, how do you make it work, or how have you seen others make that balance work? And then if there's data either one of you know, that can answer for second.
I'll leave the data to the econometrics person over there.
I figured that's why I was trying to help you.
I think in terms of just the work-life balance, I think it goes back to the company and the company culture, and them really understanding the value that women bring in, and valuing what women bring to the workplace, and understanding our lives and the things that we go through, what we have to juggle. For me, on a personal level, I have an elderly parent, my mother, who lives with me, and so that requires from time to time things that I have to do for her, whether medical related, or getting up in the morning and various things that she needs to do to get out of the door, so to speak, or whatever. At one point she was going to a daycare center, now kind of switched over now because that was pretty challenging. So what we're doing is bringing in someone to care for her in the home. But it's really, I think, working around with your leadership, your management, putting policies in place to address it in the organization. But it really does go back to the culture and how flexible it is around those things and how much they value women. That's all I've got on that.
Absolutely, I think you raise a really important question. One of the main, I think, messages of the World Bank Development Report was actually that basically being gender blind, it doesn't mean be gender equal. And that's exactly because there is all this part which is basically what we call the caring economy, which is basically what somebody has to do in the household, which is children care, or elderly care. It's a combination of different things that basically women end up having to do. Now, the data is that even in the places like the Scandinavian countries, where women definitely have a much better deal than many other countries, women still do about twice as much housework or caring after people than men. And these things are not going to change. And I think we actually have to recognize that the only way women can actually be on a sort of playing field with male in the workplace is by allowing them to combine these two different things. And that's very important. We're doing a lot of work actually on the role of childcare provision, for example, elderly care provision, in not only in promoting female labor force participation, but mainly in reducing wage inequality. Because what happens is that a lot of women do join the labor market, but then they can't work full time and they can't get to senior positions because they have this other commitment. There is a lot of evidence on that. It's summarizing the report, and as I said, what we are actually focusing on now is to identify what works best in terms of interventions for different companies. I don't think there is a general sort of magic bullet. It varies a lot from depending on the composition of the household and things. I personally, you know the story, I have two children. I have a boy and a girl, and the boy is 20 and the girl is 17. And she wants to go be an engineer. He's actually the artist in the family. So maybe it's something to do with what the gender roles were in the household. It's not been easy. But I think having the type of support from the organization I work for that made it feasible, or to be flexible.
Thank you. Well, I'm getting thank you both. I'm getting the card signal. So I'm going to have